Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of How's It Going with me, Leo Young. So this week's episode is called Dotting Your I's and Crossing Your T's. So with that, I have a very special guest. She is a real estate attorney from Ligris, right here close to where I am in Massachusetts. So everybody, please welcome Liz Perez Barletta.
Hi, how are you all?
Good. Thank you for coming on.
Of course.
So just before we continue too, quick disclaimer for the information that we cover during our conversation on the show. It's for entertainment purposes, so I would recommend talking to the appropriate professional before making any material decisions, right?
Absolutely. Great disclaimer.
Yeah. So Liz, would you mind telling everyone a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, awesome. So thank you all. Well, thank you, Leo, first and foremost for having me on. I'm really excited to kind of get to know your viewers and help answer any questions they may have, of course. But just to kind of discuss what I do and who I am, like you mentioned, my name is Liz. I am a real estate attorney with Ligris and Associates, right in Massachusetts. We have several offices, Boston, Wellesley, and Newton. And we focus primarily on residential real estate. So conveyancing in particular. So whether it's buyer representation, lender representation, seller representation, that's what we're working on a day-to-day basis. I'm originally from Florida, from Miami in particular.
Wow.
So I came up here for school and stuck around. Nice. Even though people think I'm crazy for staying in this kind of weather, but New England is now home. And I'm just very happy to sort of be here. I also am a Spanish speaker. So if you have any viewers out there who do speak Spanish, if you ever need assistance and guidance, I'm happy to assist as well.
Definitely. And so I must ask, Liz, why did you choose to stay here from Florida?
I know. I'm asked all the time when people find that out.
Yeah.
I do like the seasons, which if you're ever from a place that's always hot or always cold, you realize that you do miss the variety. I think you appreciate here. I appreciate more a very sunny, hot day than I did when I was in Florida, where I could go to the beach all the time. So that, and also I met my husband, who is from here locally. So
nice. That's
combination
awesome.
of factors. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So my old manager came from California, and he said the exact same thing. You know, California is nice and all, like 70-degree weather sort of, but you only get to wear like so many clothes.
Exactly. and there's something about that crisp fall or spring day that it's never replicated, or maybe it's one day in their winter.
For sure.
It's nice.
Right. I mean, now it's like so strange, like the weather. I have to check the weather app every time before like I go out.
Every day. Yeah.
I don't know if it's going to be hot or just randomly cold.
I know.
Right? Wasn't it snowing like pretty recently, like last month or something?
Yeah.
You never know.
No, it was funny. That day I texted my family and I was like, it's snowing outside. They're like, this is insane. It's 90 degrees here.
Yeah. Only in Massachusetts, right?
Only here. Yep.
Yeah.
So true.
Well, anyways, let's as always, viewers have an option to donate to a charity, if they got something useful from this episode. And Liz, would you mind just introducing the charity of the week?
Yeah, so I chose St. Jude's Children's Hospital. I think they do an amazing job. My office in particular has done a lot for raising money for St. Jude. A couple of years ago, our former CEO, Costa Ligris, actually ran the marathon in support of St. Jude. So we definitely, as an office, do like to support that organization. They do an amazing job and take care of our most important little people.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll put the link below
Awesome.
to donate to St. Jude's. And So let's just jump right into it. How about that?
Sure.
So, just in a nutshell, how's it going in your world right now? How is COVID-19 and all the things going on affected your business?
Yeah, great question. So, it's interesting because I think that we were all incredibly nervous when all this happened, not just for our
Yeah.
families and for like what life would be, but just also for business and trying to figure out how we would all come out on the other side. And we're still in the midst of it.
Mhm.
But in reality, a lot has not changed because since the beginning, we have been deemed essential.
Right.
So in reality, our day-to-day in terms of how we interact with people may have changed, but in terms of actual how we conduct a closing hasn't really changed too much. We still are able to have clients come to our office, conduct a closing. We've installed a sort of plexiglass wall for our receptionist, so she's protected from clients. We have now, having to call up to the office to make sure that the conference room has been vacated so someone can come back in. Between closings, we're wiping it down. We have our cleaners coming in more often. So doing all those things to just prevent any kind of spread and keep everybody safe. But in reality, there hasn't been much change to sort of conducting the closing.
Right.
There are some new things out there. It's not electronic per se because there's still everything is paper, and it just adds a couple of different layers. So a lot of practitioners aren't fans of the new bill because it's just not practical. So a lot of people are not even using it. Some people are doing what we're calling like a doorstep closing or outside closings where, it's picnic table set up and having documents, having the clients sort of sit at their door, their stoop, and then we're kind of witnessing their signature. So it's just kind of getting a little bit creative, but we're still closing, which is important. And I think that especially with the refi market was so hot that we didn't really feel the impact of any sort of dip in business, thankfully. And but it's also the spring market, so people are definitely out there still. There were a couple of weeks where I kind of felt like it may have been dipping, where things were getting worse with COVID. But overall, I feel like it's been pretty stabilized, which is not what we were necessarily expecting or hopeful of. But we are very, very lucky in Massachusetts in particular that there's, still a lot of demand for people who are getting new jobs, people who are now wanting to leave maybe their condo in the city with 200 people in the same building and go to the suburbs. So there's a lot of new reasons why I think people are also still busy. So
that's great to hear. I'm always curious as to how what's been happening recently has affected different industries. And it's good to hear as far as your industry goes, there's still pretty much the same level of demand. And for the most part, it's business as usual, except, behind like plexiglass, like masks and like all the remote stuff.
Yeah.
But
exactly. No one knows that we're smiling except maybe if our cheekbones go up a little, but like it's weird.
Maybe like someone will invent like a clear mask at some point.
That's an idea. Right? You should patent that.
Maybe you can help me with it.
Right? That's actually a really good idea.
Right? I saw somebody make like a mask, but with like a plastic sheet here. So like,
interesting.
It's for like people hard of hearing, I think. So like they can communicate better.
So they can still visually see the reading of the lips. That's
exactly.
There's so much ingenuity that comes out of disasters.
I think, there's a saying like, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So
absolutely.
For the most part,
sparks a lot of people.
Exactly. And across the board, like we've been very creative in our own ways to sort of keep things the way they are. And just seeing how all of the industries have sort of adapted and evolved, I think is pretty cool. And I think these changes would be here to stay.
Yeah, I agree. It's almost, at the beginning of this, we're like, when this ends, like, this is just temporary. But like, I think, and even in certain meetings that we've been in, where we've talked about what's life after COVID going to be, I feel like it's still going to have a lot of the same sort of nuances that we've had to adapt to, because people still may not feel comfortable for a long, long time. So having these virtual options is so important for continuity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and remind me again, so how are closings done remotely now for you?
So there is this remote notarization bill. So what it does, and what we were hoping for, is what other states have, where you can actually electronically close, meaning you go into maybe even a Zoom room like this, but you have documents that you're literally clicking through and docu-signing, and then you can record those documents, literally touching no paper, which would have been amazing. That's not what happened.
Yeah.
So this remote notarization bill, they won't even call it an electronic notarization bill, because it's not electronic. It's having to get your client. So let's say it's a buyer. Mm-hmm. They have a closing package. We have to get them the pieces of paper.
Yep.
They will go into a Zoom room, for example, with me. They will sign the documents after I've explained them, and I will watch them sign. Mm-hmm. Then I have to record that interaction for my records to make sure that it was done properly. Then the next day I will receive, or even that same day if I courier the package back to me. Then I have to get into another Zoom call with that same person and say, is this the document you signed? Is this your signature? And I have to record that as well. So as you can imagine, there's so many pieces and steps there that it's just not very helpful, especially in a purchase where time is of the essence. And we don't always have our closing packages a day in advance. Sometimes we get it the morning of closing. So most of the people in my office who've actually used that process have done so for refinances of primary residences. Mm-hmm. Because with a primary refi, there is a 3-day period from the moment of signing to the moment we actually record the documents. So that time delay is less impactful. So that's really been everyone else for the most part has just had to keep closing as they normally would, or in that way that it's like outside or at their doorstep, to just help in that way. But in terms of the remote closing, it's not like what we were hoping for, but it's the options there for the time being. Right.
So it's sounding like, this was like a system that was put in place in like a really, really short amount of time.
Yeah.
Like, do you foresee in the future, like, more development going into this and like maybe more convenience closings in the future?
So I was hoping that we had to have been in a situation like this to get Massachusetts in particular to pass something like this. Because in our state, we have so many things that other states don't have. Granted, we are an attorney state where you actually have an attorney conducting a closing, and because our legislatures have found that conducting a closing and issuing title is the practice of law, whereas other states don't have that. You don't have lawyers. You have what are called title companies, and a lot of people from this area, maybe from New Hampshire, they don't even have lawyers that are required to do the closing. So we are a little bit more complicated in good ways, like having lawyers involved, but unfortunately then it doesn't, it slows the other sort of progress potentially, where other states have that sort of literal e-closing, which maybe this will be the stepping stone, but we at least I thought that how dramatic everything was at the very beginning of COVID would have pushed them to that route instead of this sort of not so helpful route.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Now, just to take a quick step back, Liz, just for those of you watching that are not so familiar, what role do you play in a home buying and selling process?
Great question. So for the most part, I always tell agents and loan officers, they're the ones who, for the most part, are referring me into a transaction. Generally speaking, get involved at the point where an offer has been accepted. But I always tell my referral partners and even my, clients or families and friends, if you want an attorney involved earlier, even at the offer stage, that's great, because as many viewers who are maybe new home buyers will soon notice, the process, as soon as an offer is accepted, goes in lightning speed. And there's so many decisions to make at that moment. When your offer is accepted, you're calling inspectors, you're calling lawyers, you're calling your lender, like all these things. Whereas I always feel like if you can have all of that done and selected in advance of the offer, great. And also sometimes we have clients who have weird particular conditions that they need to add to an offer that I'm always happy to review before it's submitted to a seller. So I always prefer to be involved earlier, but most of the time I'm involved once the offer has been accepted. And the reason for that is that I'm hired generally as a buyer attorney to negotiate the purchase and sale agreement. So we are in a 2-contract state where you have an offer that's sort of a bare bones agreement. And then we have a purchase and sale agreement that is much lengthier, where literally every word can be negotiated with the seller's attorney. So it's definitely a lengthier document. You really need to have your own counsel as a buyer reviewing that document, because of course the sellers, who are the ones who prepared the initial document, they're going to make it seller skewed to benefit their clients. So you really don't want to be signing a non-negotiated purchase and sale agreement. So for the most part, and I'm also just kind of talking about the buying side of things for right now. Yeah. So once that purchase and sale agreement is reviewed, the next thing we do for the most part in terms of buyer representation is, if that buyer is getting a mortgage, there's generally a condition in the offer and then the contract that says that if the buyer's denied financing, they can back out of the deal and get their money back, which is great. But that deadline is a super important deadline, because their bank will need to issue them an approval letter. But that approval letter most of the time has conditions listed on it. So it could be like, we need your last pay stub, we need verification of employment, we need something from the IRS called a tax transcript, all these different things that they're needing, which gives the bank the ability to say, if any of these things aren't achieved by closing, we're not going to lend you money, because it's a condition of your loan. So as your attorney, it's important to have reviewed what those conditions are and to make a determination whether those can be achieved by closing. Because if they can't, then it's my job as the buyer attorney to extend that deadline. Because at the end of the day, if that deadline passes and then tomorrow your bank says, no, because of that last thing that just came in, you're now denied financing, the buyer's deposit, which is a big chunk of money, is at risk for the seller to keep.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And just elaborating on that a little bit. So aside from like various deadlines, what are maybe like some common things that you negotiate in the purchase and sale?
Definitely. So, sometimes it's literally small little things in the document that make a big difference. So for example, in most standard purchase and sale agreements, a seller is given an ability to extend the closing for up to 30 days if they can't resolve a title issue, or maybe there's a punch list of things that the sellers have to repair and they haven't done it by closing. So they can extend because the condition of the property, it needs extra time to resolve. But that paragraph usually says that the seller's automatically given 30 days. The problem with that is that if you are a buyer who just locked their rate and your rate expires a week from closing, then the cost to extend your rate is going to be on you as a buyer. So one of the things that we try and add is a clarification that says, you seller can have, if you're not ready to go with title by closing, you have 30 days or when my buyer's rate expires. That way, it's a more limited time frame, and then we're not in a situation where the buyer is going to be on the hook for that extension fee. Usually, we have to negotiate it at that point. If we get to that deadline and the seller's not ready yet, then we say, hey, you seller, it's your fault you're not ready. Potentially, will you cover the cost to extend the buyer's rate? So it gives us an upper hand, which we wouldn't have had if we didn't make that change. That's one example.
Yeah, that's a great
really
example.
One.
Yeah, no, I never even thought about that actually.
Yeah.
I mean, it's these subtle things that just get buried in the, I don't know, 12-page document or something.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And just in terms of the process from start to finish, would you mind walking us through, like, from your perspective?
Sure. So and even just adding to that, so once that commitment deadline passes and that's been resolved, then, for the most part, we're meeting with you the day of closing, walking through that whole closing package, which can be hundreds of pages long.
Yeah.
But there is also another aspect of what we do, which is our work with the bank. And so the process really, again, begins with the offer. Sometimes we're involved, sometimes we're not. Then the purchase and sale agreement. Once the purchase and sale agreement's been signed, then you as a buyer, for the most part, working with your bank kind of in the background, getting approved. We get to that commitment deadline. Hopefully at that point you've been approved. And then we get to a couple days before closing, where you're getting your initial final numbers from the bank, called the closing disclosure. And then usually the day or so before closing is when at closing, we'll give you that final figure, which is what you'll bring to closing in either a certified check or a wire transfer. But that's kind of the whole process for what a buyer would expect for interaction with a buyer attorney.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And sort of elaborating on that too, I get this question a lot. So people ask me, like, what's the difference between, like, a buyer's attorney, like a pure buyer's attorney, versus a bank attorney?
Yeah, awesome question. Yeah, it's one of our top questions too, and it's always something I explain sort of in my initial intake call with a client, because I think a lot of people, they even if they hear from family and friends, they're like, if someone says, "Oh, who's your attorney?" They're like, I don't know, someone just assigned to the bank. And so it's one of those things where I think it's super important for people to understand that there is a difference. So buyer attorney was really basically what I kind of explained already: negotiating the purchase and sale agreement, tracking the important deadlines, being with you at closing, being available to you as well with questions, which is a unique thing, I think, for a lot of lawyers that actually interact with their clients. But the bank attorney has a very distinct role. So that attorney's responsibility is to research the title. Basically, in Massachusetts, at least, our standard is going back 50 years to ensure that what you're buying has clear marketable titles, what we call it. And so we'll certify to the bank that the title is good. We'll also act as an escrow agent the day of closing. So most buyers will pay their initial purchase and sale agreement and offer deposit to the list agent, but the final funds would be paid to the closing attorney or the bank attorney, because all the money will flow through our account that day. So that way the bank is also assured that all of those liabilities of the sellers get paid before the seller gets paid. So even though there's two distinct roles in Massachusetts in particular, we are able to act in both capacities. So that's why a lot of people think that the bank attorney is their attorney, and most of the time they are. But the number one thing I always remind clients is, unless you've actually spoken to that person, you don't know if they're actually really negotiating the purchase and sale agreement for you, or if they just made sure that the names and the dates and the price was right, and they're not really doing much to assist you. So if you haven't spoken to this person before your purchase and sale agreement is signed, and if you don't get something called an engagement letter, something that literally says, I am your representative, then you're not protected in reality. So it's really important for you to make sure that you've had a conversation with the lawyer before you actually sign the purchase and sale agreement, to make sure they did what you thought they were going to do.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it seems like a very important distinction to have.
Totally.
Although I feel like it's easy to mix up between, like, the buyer's attorney and the bank attorney.
Especially since most of us do both, that it's just kind of, it's kind of how things are, I guess. And so it's also how things are that a lot of lawyers don't do good customer service and make sure that, real estate is a volume business on the legal side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Our fees are limited, our fees are capped in certain ways. So people just work on volume, and with a lot of volume comes bad service, in my opinion,
Right.
unless you're doing things the right way from the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
and have enough help to do that. So a lot of people, they just get maybe an offer sent to them from their attorney, and they've never talked to their client until the day of closing. And it's just that's just not how law
Right.
should be.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And so how do you view this, and like how do you like to interact with your clients?
Yeah. So one of the things that I think, pride myself on is the fact that my clients have all spoken with me. And I've had some clients refer to me who are not first time home buyers. They've bought numerous times. And this one in particular was a couple of years ago, and I reached out to her, we spoke, and she said at the end of the call, Liz, I have to tell you, I've bought like 3 homes and I've never spoken to the attorney before the closing. And I like that floored me. I couldn't
Yeah.
believe it because, this is I mean, it may not be a big deal to every lawyer because they're just used to it, but this is a big deal. Every transaction is a big deal to the person you're working with. So to not take the time and have that personal touch and hear from your client to make sure that all of their concerns are addressed in the agreement, I think is just bad practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's great to say. I mean, especially nowadays when service is everything, right? Like we hear
Totally.
service this, service that. And I mean, little details just go by, especially if
Yeah,
you're just going like 60 miles an hour and you're like, okay, I'm just going to do
totally.
a bunch of closings. It's easy to forget.
Yeah. I think it's funny. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever heard of this term, like bad CPA syndrome, or like where bad doctor syndrome, people
Uh-huh.
who you just are referred to someone and you've just maybe had a horrible primary care doctor your entire life. They're a jerk. And you're just like, okay, I'll go with it because that's who I've always gone to.
Right.
I think that happens in all industries. And it's always shocking to me because I feel like as a consumer, maybe it's because I'm a millennial and I expect
Mhm.
more, but I expect more. And it's
Mhm.
always surprising where I see that sort of my colleagues aren't doing that, or throughout the entire industry aren't doing that. But
Definitely.
your viewers are worth it.
Yeah,
They need
definitely.
to get good service.
Yeah. And for those of you watching, if you're looking to do a transaction in real estate, make sure to contact Liz for that. I mean, just from what it sounds like, service is very important. So she's happy to answer any questions you might have in that
Totally.
regards.
Always.
Yeah. And moving on. So another question I get a lot too. So now that you mentioned it, like what exactly is title insurance and what does it cover? Is it
Yeah.
necessary?
Yeah. Great question. So also one of like my top 5 questions that I get from people,
Yeah.
because it's a little confusing, especially if you are buying a home with a mortgage. There's 2 kinds of title insurance. There's lender's title insurance, and then there's owner's title insurance. So obviously inherently in the words, lenders covers the bank, owners covers you. The
Mhm.
problem is that, not the problem, the
Mhm.
unfortunate part of it is that you as a buyer, if you're getting a mortgage, you must pay for the lender to have coverage.
Hmm.
It's an obligatory closing cost.
Right.
But me as a buyer, I have the option to either buy in a policy or not, which is great. You have the option, but it isn't super cheap. It's not super expensive either. It is something that is an investment, I think, for most people. And so it's one of those things where people are like, well, it's optional. I'm not going to take it because I don't need it.
Mhm.
Where, that's up for debate. But I would say that the majority of people that I represent, unless maybe they're a developer even then, I have a lot of developers who still buy it, even if they're holding onto the home for a very short period of time and doing a flip.
Mhm.
But I would say the majority of people who opt out is because they initially want to opt out because they weren't explained what it is. And once I explained what it is, they're like, oh God, I need it. Or they're developers who are holding the house for like a 30-day flip. And they're like, you know what, risk is already calculated in my decision. I'll take the risk. But what it covers to kind of explain. So I touched on the fact that one of our responsibilities for the bank is to do a 50-year title search.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, what we're doing is we're looking at the registry documents, what have been filed in certain sort of history of a property. If something has been filed incorrectly, so if something hasn't been properly indexed, if you think about even a document like a deed is notarized by someone saying, I'm this person and I signed this as my true act and deed and all those fun things. Mm-hmm. But what if that notary just doesn't know that most notaries don't know who it is that is signing that document. So all they really ask for is a license, which is, I'm sure, easy. I don't know, but I'm sure easy to get a fake ID. So imagine there are situations, of course, they're not all that common, but there are situations where fraud is covered with your title insurance policy. Again, it's not malpractice for me to have not caught that, because I can't know what I don't know. So if you even think about it just from that perspective, that I'm literally just looking at these black and white pieces of paper, there's so many parts that could have an error on it. There's so many things that could not be discovered in that research. There's so much intention that I couldn't discover. If there was, let's say, a probate of a home, so maybe someone who owned a home passed away, I'm relying on the fact that all the heirs listed on their probate were the right ones. But what if there was a son that wasn't listed because of spite or some random thing? That person potentially has a claim on the home. So there are all these worst case scenario type of issues, but the worst thing that could happen, and this is my belief always with insurance, is it's one of those things that you hate to pay for, but if something happens and you don't have it, you really wish you did, because the cost to fix whatever is way more than the initial investment. So it's kind of an overview, but the lender's title insurance, don't even think about it, because you have to pay for it and you get no coverage on it. The owner's title insurance is an optional fee. I do recommend it, but it's something that you do have the option of waiving. And the other great thing about owner's title insurance is that you buy it your day of closing and you have it the entire time you own the home. So if you're in a home for 50 years, when you're selling it in 50, if a title issue was discovered, that would cover you.
Yeah, that's really cool, actually. So, I mean, it basically, yes, it prevents like a long lost sibling of the previous owner just to come knocking at the door. I think more importantly, it helps you sleep easy at night, not having to worry about things like this.
For sure. And when you're buying buyers and lender, I forgot to mention, when you buy them simultaneously, when you're purchasing a home, all the title insurance companies give you a discounted fee. So you're not seeing the discount, because what the bank is always going to quote you what the discount is already. But if you were to ask me, I could tell you if you ended up buying them separately, what the cost would have actually been, and it would have been much more money.
Gotcha. Okay. And just to sort of bring it back, just the general viewers, I know a lot of them out there, they may be looking to buy a house soon, or for others, it may be like a few years down the line. So do you have like just general tips that are like good for an average person to know?
Sure. Yeah. I think the team aspect of a real estate transaction, I can't sort of explain in any words how important that is and how it can really make or break a transaction. I think that it's one of those things where you could be very lucky, and even if you have people that are kind of pieced together and you haven't who haven't necessarily worked with each other before, for example, they could do a great job and you could still close and everything would be great. But I've always found that having those little sort of pods of your realtor, your loan officer, and your real estate attorney that all kind of work together, have established a groove, know what to expect from each other, rely on the fact that they are all doing their job at a certain level. I think if you are able to assemble that team that also you feel comfortable with. So sometimes, you know, I'm not always the best person for every single person, although I like to think I am, and I adjust, but it's true. Some people just have a different preference, and that's fine. So I think that it's important to have people that you as a buyer feel comfortable with, because, or seller that you feel comfortable with, that you can pick up the phone and call. And that's what I tell, you know, every sort of, sometimes I'm in a situation where I know that the buyer is talking to different people, or even they say, what's your advice to me? Because I'm choosing between lenders. I'm like, which one do you just feel comfortable with? Because this is like a long, 60 days is the average closing timeline or whatever. It doesn't seem like a lot, but it is a long haul when you're kind of dealing with this on a day-to-day basis, and it's new, especially for first-time home buyers. If you don't feel comfortable, pick up the phone or call or text your attorney. That's not great. I mean, you're not going to feel like all your questions are answered. Or, you know, sometimes with lenders, you feel more comfortable with the way that some person explains all of the details of a loan versus how another person explains it. Everyone has a different way of learning and a different way of appreciating information. So I would say having a good team for you is the number one way to have a successful and positive transaction, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a great tip too. I'm definitely a big proponent of that. Like having the right people by your side can make a world's difference.
100%. 100%.
So we are running out of time here. So let's just finish up with a light question. What is one thing that you can't live without?
So I would say that I can't live without my little baby. I have a 14, almost 15-month-year-old,
nice.
And he's the coolest little kid, and he's a super joy.
That's
so
awesome.
I'd say him.
Yeah. Great answer.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to sort of summarize sort of what we learned and spoke about today. So we went over the role of the real estate attorney, what they do in a home buying and selling process. And we also briefly walked through the process from start to finish, answered some commonly asked questions like the difference between a buyer's versus lender's attorney, or, you know, the importance of title insurance and the different types of them. And also just general tips like having a good team by you. Did I miss anything?
No, that was great. That was great.
Okay, awesome. Well, just to reiterate as well, you know, if you back at home watching this got some value out of it, you learned a thing or two, please do consider donating to the St. Jude's Foundation. It's a great foundation right here. And I'll drop a link below. And for those of you that are more curious about the home buying process and you have more questions, I'll put Liz's contact information below. But do you want to just say it just in case?
Yeah. So thank you first and foremost for having me on, Leo. I really appreciate it. This was fun. If there are, I could talk about this forever, as you could probably tell.
Yeah.
But if you viewers out there ever have a question, if I can answer, my email address is ebarletta@ligris.com. Our website's ligris.com, and my bio's on that website. You can Facebook me, or my Instagram handle is LizBESQ.
Awesome. Well, Liz, it was a pleasure having you on. And to those of you back at home, thank you for tuning in. And I will see you next week. All right.
Have a great one.
See you, everybody.